state many, many, many times. But I try to do it, I have done a town hall in every county the year that I was running for office, as well as the 2 years that I've been in office. When I ran, I said that I would do that, and I have been keeping my promise. So I have 3 this week, 3 more next week, and I think I'll be done with about 13 or 14 by the end of April, and I'll just continue traveling around the state, trying to be efficient in doing that. What I like to do about town halls and why I promised to do these over time was, I think this is a real opportunity for me not only to explain to you what is going on back in Washington, D.C., what I'm doing in Congress, but it's also an opportunity for you to engage with me. I will speak for about 15 or 20 minutes, giving you a brief summary of what we've been doing. There's a lot that's been going on, so I'm not going to touch everything, and it's not because I'm trying to avoid any particular... It's not that I'm trying to avoid any particular issues, but it's just that there's so much going on that if there is something that you want to talk about, if there's something specific, if there's something specific that you want to talk about, I am happy to address it in your questions. First of all, the first law that was passed this year that I was involved with, actually it was the first law, bill that was signed into law, was the Laken-Riley Act. And that is a product of the Judiciary Committee, of which I am a member. It mandates detention for illegal aliens arrested for theft, assault of a police officer, and other crimes resulting in death or serious injury. The purpose of this and what this relates to is the young woman the young nursing student who was killed in Georgia by the illegal alien who had quite a rap sheet, but no one would detain him. So this is to make sure that that does not happen again. I was incredibly honored to go to the White House for the signing of this bill. It was a very emotional day, in part because there were several people there who had been before the Judiciary Committee over the last couple of years talking about the losses that they have had as a result of illegal aliens over the last 4 years. On February 25th, I voted in favor of the House budget resolution. Now keep in mind, this budget resolution is not the budget that we are moving forward with. It is the framework to allow us to start working with the Senate side to put together a budget so we can then move to reconciliation. What is reconciliation? Reconciliation is what parties do, or what members of the House and the Senate and the President do when they're all under one party. So several years ago, the Democrats had the House, the Senate, and the presidency. They did reconciliation, and their big bill was called the Inflation Reduction Act, if you'll remember that. So we are doing reconciliation because we have the House, the Senate, and the presidency. What that means is in the House, it really doesn't change our rules very much, but in the Senate, you only need 50 votes rather than 60 votes. The point is, though, you cannot change policy. This is purely about budget. This is purely about spending and reducing spending money or reducing the spending of money. In our budget reconciliation, or in our budget resolution, we instructed Congress that we would enact at least $1.5 trillion in mandatory savings, provide up to $300 billion for border security, prevent $4.5 trillion in tax hikes, and extend the debt limit by $4 trillion. The debt limit was necessary because that's paying past bills. That's paying for the bills that have been incurred over the last 4 years. We don't have any choice. Those are already on our credit card. We're going to have to pay that. It does not make any funding cuts. It does not create any new funding. What it does is it just allows us so we can now start the discussions with the Senate to get a final budget in place and then again start that reconciliation process. On March 11th, just 2 days ago, I voted in favor of the continuing resolution, which extends funding throughout the remainder of this fiscal year. I have not been someone who has generally voted for continuing resolutions. I would prefer that we did our job. I would prefer that we do all 12 budget bills And the House has actually been very good at getting our budget bills done. The 2 years that I have been in the House of Representatives, we have done between 7 and 10 of our budget bills each year and sent them to the Senate for them to die in the Senate. The point of this being that the Senate likes to operate with what are called omnibus spending bills. The 1 and 2 and 3,000 page monstrosities where everybody shoves in as much spending as they can possibly get, which is why we're $36 trillion in debt right now. I have never voted for an omnibus. They tried to do that to us in December, right before Christmas. There was a huge backlash against it. We pushed back against it, stopped them from doing an omnibus spending bill, and just did a continuing resolution until tomorrow, until March 14th. That's why we're in this cycle. The reason that I voted for this particular CR is it allows us to continue with the budgeting process as I've already described, but it also keeps spending flat. It actually reduces some spending in some areas, and it pluses up some of our defense spending. For example, this is the first time that we are going to be giving a raise to our enlisted men and women for quite some time. For a long time, but it seems to have been held hostage for quite a while in trying to get that raise through. We've done it through the NDAA, but it has not succeeded. So this time, through this CR that we passed on Tuesday night, it actually includes a pretty substantial pay raise for our enlisted men and women. We have also been doing what are called Congressional Review Act. And what CRAs are is they allow Congress to try to undo some of the most burdensome regulations that have been put in place over the last 6 months. At the end of every presidency, what you will see is just massive regulations being adopted by a variety of agencies, whether they're ready for prime time or not. Prior to this, Obama was the most prolific regulator in our history. He had 95,000 pages in the Federal Register his last year in office. Biden beat that by 25,000 pages. He had almost 120,000 pages of regulations in 2024 alone. That doesn't even count the ones from the 3 other years prior to that. So we've been doing what are called Congressional Review Acts. They pass out of the House, again, because we don't have the 60 votes in the Senate. A couple of them have passed. Actually, we've been able to get some Democrat votes on those. But others have not, but we continue to try to roll back those regulations. I'm just going to go through a bit about what I've been doing, what my assignments have been. I'm on the Judiciary Committee, and I'm on the Natural Resources Committee. I did not want to change. I was appointed to both of those as a freshman. I wanted to stay on both of those. They dovetail with my skill set, and they're also important to Wyoming. On the Judiciary Committee, I'm on the Constitutional and Limited Government Subcommittee, and I'm on Administrative Law and Regulatory Reform and Antitrust. On Natural Resources, I am very honored to be appointed as the chairman of the Subcommittee on Water, Wildlife, and Fisheries, and that accounts for about 60 to 70% of all the work that the Natural Resources Committee does. So I oversee the Endangered Species Act, NEPA, all wet water associated with under NOAA, Fish and Wildlife Service. So it's a lot of the issues that we deal with right here in the state of Wyoming. So I'm really excited to be the chairman of that subcommittee. And then I'm also on Energy and Mineral Resources. That's also important for the state of Wyoming. And today I was honored to be able to do a tour of the power plant down in Kemmer. I really enjoyed doing that. This year I was appointed as the Republican Study Committee's chairman of the Article 1 Task Force. Ooh. This is the first year that we have ever done this, and the purpose of it is to try to implement the United States Supreme Court's decision on Chevron. As you know, under Chevron, the Supreme Court in 1984 determined that courts must defer to what administrative agencies say the law is. And as a practitioner, as a trial attorney, I can tell you that was terribly, terribly unfair. It was a violation of due process. It violated our Constitution. it was not, that law was, or that Supreme Court decision was flawed from the very beginning. But last year, the United States Supreme Court finally overturned that and said it's up to the courts to decide what the law is. Well, that's great. I agree with that. That goes all the way back to Marbury versus Madison from 200 years ago. But here's more significant. I even in some ways disagree with that. It's up to Congress. It's up to our legislative branch. It's up to our legislative branch to say what the law is. It isn't up for the judges or the administrative agencies. We need to do a better job of writing laws. We need to do a better job of not being vague and ambiguous when we define things. We need to make sure that we say what we mean and mean what we say. And that way there isn't any interpretation. But more importantly, then you guys know what the law is. You know what you can and cannot do. You know what is, thank you. Thank you. So what I'm doing with the Article 1 Task Force is really focusing on making congressmen and women better practitioners. We need to be better at writing laws. We need to be better at thinking about things like sunset provisions. Should we think about whether when we pass a law it ought to be in place until the end of time? Or should we think about maybe 5 years down the road we ought to revisit it? And I'll give you an example of why that's important. Under Section 230,
we'd like to see you walk around.
Under Section 230, if you'll remember, that is the law that gives immunity to our social media companies. And over the last many years, especially in the Judiciary Committee and the Select Committee on Weaponization of the Federal Government, which I was a part of, we uncovered massive censorship operations coming out of the federal government. And they were using the social media companies, whether it was YouTube or Meta or X. The X-Files exposed massive amounts of censorship coming out of the Biden administration. And so if we had had a sunset provision on Section 230, I don't think that the social media companies would have been as readily eager to censor conservative thought or conservative speech, because they would have known they would have to come back before Congress to get reauthorization. Another example is I'm a very strong civil libertarian, and I believe that the FBI and the Department of Justice have been fundamentally violating our civil liberties with the FISA courts. We know what happened in 2016. We know what happened thereafter. They have been abusing the FISA court. They have not been getting warrants. They have been spying on a variety of people in violation of the Fourth Amendment to the United States Constitution. But FISA has a sunset on it. Unless we reauthorize it, it cannot stay in place. So last year, over the last 2 years when I was in Congress, the Judiciary Committee was doing a deep dive into the changes that we needed to make to FISA to make sure that you're protected from the federal government, to make sure that your civil liberties are protected from being violated by whether it's the FBI or the NSA or the Department of Justice. We made 56 changes to that law before we agreed to reauthorize it. So sunset provisions can be very important, and those are the kinds of things that I want our practitioners, I want our congressmen and women to do a better job at actually legislating. I want them to put more definitions in. I want them to explain what the intent of the law is. So as the chairman of the Article 1 Task Force, that is something that I'm going to push forward with. I'm also, just to give you a quick summary on what I've done to date, I have introduced 23 bills and I have co-sponsored 94 bills. We have passed 106 bills out of the House of Representatives, but only one bill so far, the Lake and Riley Act, has become law. But there are two pending Senate passage for the CRs that I just said for the continuing resolution. And I think the continuing resolution, there's a lot of chatter that the Senate Democrats may reject that. I don't believe that. I believe that they'll pass that tomorrow to keep the government funded. On the very first day of the 119th Congress, I introduced what's called the First Amendment Accountability Act, to hold government officials accountable for violating our First Amendment liberties. So the First Amendment is freedom of speech, freedom of religion, freedom of the press, to peaceably assemble and to petition your government for redress. I don't think you have to look any further than COVID to realize that our federal government violated every single one of those provisions, almost on a daily basis for a long period of time. But here's the thing, right now you can't sue the federal government for that. You can sue the state. You can sue the state for it. We have what's called 42 USC section 1983. That was a statute that was adopted after the Civil War when there were states that were still attempting to disenfranchise minorities and slaves. And so Congress passed a bill that said any person who under color of state law violates someone's civil liberties can be held accountable for damages. You can get an injunction or you can get attorney's fees. We don't have a similar kind of law. We don't have something similar for the federal government when it comes to the First Amendment. And I don't think that's right. I think if somebody in the federal government violates your freedom of speech, your freedom of religion, your freedom to peaceably assemble, I think your freedom of the press, I think that if somebody in the federal government does that, they should be held liable. So my First Amendment Accountability Act would allow you to sue that government official for damages, for an injunction, and so you could seek attorney's fees as well. I'm also continuing to champion legislation that is specific to Wyoming. I have a bill to delist the grizzly bear, to end the federal coal moratorium, and to terminate Biden's rewrite of both the Buffalo and Rock Springs RMPs. I do think that we will succeed in getting that done. I met with Doug Burgum, the head of the Department of Interior, just a couple of weeks ago. I talked to him about both the the Rock Springs RMP and the Buffalo RMP. He has pulled both of those off of the table, so neither one of them are being implemented at this point in time. He also is aware of our efforts. He is also aware of our efforts to delist the grizzly bear. One of the things that I keep talking about with the grizzly bear, and I did the gray wolf before that, in my opinion, the Endangered Species Act is a good law. But if a species has been recovered, we should not be spending our limited resources on that species. We should be focusing on the species that need the assistance. So the grizzly bear was listed as threatened in 1975. Our recovery goals were 500 grizzlies in the greater Yellowstone ecosystem. Mind you, that's not all the grizzly bears in the country, that's just greater Yellowstone. We have over 1,100 bears. We have had a recovered grizzly bear population for over 2 decades. There have been 4 separate efforts to delist. And even when the Fish and Wildlife Service, and usually the Fish and Wildlife Service is on our side on this, the Fish and Wildlife Service is delisted. Environmental groups have gone in and sued, and we've had courts out of Montana that have withheld our ability to delist the grizzly bear. So I have a bill to delist the grizzly bear if we're not able to do it through the ESA. In terms of administrative reform, which many of you know that's something that I've worked on for decades as an attorney, I'm really advocating for a legislative agenda to accomplish the goals of the Article 1 task force. So when I meet with other representatives, I'm constantly talking about what we need to do to reclaim our authority as the legislators. And part of the reason that is so important, and there are several people in this room right now, a representative over here, former representative, senator, county commissioner, city council folks I believe are in here. You are the ones that are elected. I'm elected. I'm accountable to you. I'm back here on a Thursday night in Afton, Wyoming, telling you what I'm doing, and I'm going to then answer your questions. How many of you can tell me who the Undersecretary of the EPA is? How many of you can tell me who the head of the Fish and Wildlife Service is right now, or who the last one was? Our form of government is that your elected officials are the ones that are accountable to you. Our forefathers fully understood the history of the administrative state because it's been around for hundreds, if not thousands of years, where unelected folks have attempted to dictate what people can do. That's not the form of government that they adopted. The form of government that they adopted was that the legislative branch, Article 1 of the Constitution, the legislative branch is who is answerable to you. And we need to make sure that we're doing a better job of representing you and also doing a better job of legislating. Brian Nesvik, I love you. He is, and he's from right here in Wyoming, and he's going to be the new head of the Fish and Wildlife Service.
Good job, Marty.
One other thing that I have done is another effort at regulatory reform is Regulatory Cooling Off Act that would allow more public participation in the regulations that administrative agencies attempt to implement. And finally, I have been confronted over the last many years as a practicing attorney. There are several agencies that have the authority to appoint what are called administrative law judges, and they act in administrative law courts. So if you're the Securities and Exchange Commission, you actually have your own judiciary. Now, it might surprise you that on average, when they take their cases, when they bring an enforcement action against Marty in front of their administrative law court, on average, the agencies win 92% of the time. Because they're all on the same team. They all wear the same jersey. So what I have done is introduced what's called the Seventh Amendment Restoration Act. And that would be that if the SEC brought an enforcement action against Marty, she could actually remove that case to an Article 3 judge under our Constitution, and they only win about 60 to 65% of the time in front of Article 3 judges. So what that means is they're probably going to do a lot less enforcement actions. So this is a way to, again, preserve our constitutional rights and make sure that that we're doing what the Constitution says. Very quickly, and you probably are aware of this if you've been paying any attention to Cowboy State Daily, I have been working very, very hard to preserve our postal services here in Wyoming. Very important. It is incredibly important. I've been terribly disappointed in the U.S. Postmaster in his efforts to shut down Wyoming and South Dakota. If he succeeds in implementing his program, Wyoming and South Dakota are going to suffer more than any other state in the nation in terms of losing our postal services. So I have one bill that requires at least one processing and distribution center in every single state. And also I've done some other transparency provisions to try to force them to actually tell us that they're going to be doing these things and allow us to participate before they make these decisions. In Utah last June they had their primary, and they're a full mail-in state for ballots. Really bad idea, by the way. But they are a full mail-in state for ballots, but in southern Utah their mail is processed in Nevada. And despite the fact that they mailed in their ballots in time, they went to Nevada, got caught up down there, and there were people that were entirely disenfranchised. And they know for a fact that it actually changed the outcome of elections. So it can disenfranchise people pretty quickly when you don't have secure and reliable mail service. We were just talking about DOGE and talking about the Department of Government Efficiency. I just want to give you some background on this, and I know that more of you will have questions about it, but I want to make sure that I give you a bit of background. It was established by the President as an office within the Executive Office of the President by reorganizing an existing agency, which was called the U.S. Digital Service, that was created by President Obama to promote efficiency in government. All this is a successor to an agency that existed under President Obama. Elon Musk has a top secret security clearance, which was actually given to him by the Biden administration. He is an employee of the White House office and is classified as a special government employee, which is a category that was created by Congress. President Biden and other presidents have had senior advisors who are special government employees. So we're not doing anything new or different. This is something that has been done throughout at least recent history. Musk is not the head of DOGE. A woman by the name of Amy Gleason is the acting director. And DOGE reports that its current savings are at $105 billion. So whether it is transgender comic books in Peru or millions in Politico subscriptions, Congress has never voted to explicitly provide funding for these items. Musk is correcting bureaucratic decisions made absent Congress, which are wasting taxpayer funds. This goes back to what I was saying a little bit ago. What we do is we appropriate money to an agency. And here's what is interesting to me. There's a lot of people who have been, not a lot, actually a very few, that have been upset that he targeted USAID first. In the interest of full disclosure, a year ago, I voted to disband and abolish USAID. I have known for a long time who USAID is. And I will just give you an example. So here's the mission statement of USAID. On behalf of the American people, we promote and demonstrate democratic values abroad and advance a free, peaceful, and prosperous world. In support of America's foreign policy, the U.S. Agency for International Development leads the U.S. government's international development and disaster assistance through partnerships and investments that save lives, reduce poverty, strengthen democratic governments, and help people emerge from humanitarian crises and progress beyond assistance. Now, what's important about that is, I think a lot of us would say, okay, that's fine. You know, that's not bad. It doesn't say anything, but I don't think there's a lot that I would necessarily disagree with. I do disagree with $500,000 to advance atheism in Nepal, a nation that is Buddhist. I disagree with aid being used to continue war economies in Afghanistan, Yemen, and Syria. I do disagree with $520 million to pay consultants to teach individuals in Africa about climate change. I disagree with $4.5 million to teach people in Kazakhstan how to combat internet trolls. I disagree with $20,000 to help LGBT people vote in Honduran elections. I disapprove of $5.5 million to improve the lives of LGBT individuals in Uganda. I disagree with $425,000 towards training Indonesian coffee companies on being gender friendly, and on and on and on. These are not programs that Congress voted on, nor would we. And had any one of these agencies, had USAID ever come to Congress and said, we want you to appropriate money for these programs, there isn't a person in Congress, Republican or Democrat, that would have voted in favor of them. So that is what is happening with DOGE. I'm just going to say one more thing in terms of the casework that we've been doing, because I think it's extremely important for you all to understand. Our offices are here to represent you. We are here to make sure that if you are having issues with administrative agencies, IRS, VA, the Social Security, ATF, whomever it is, if you are having a problem with a federal agency, call us. We will open a case file and we will try to find a way to help you. So far, we have opened 3,200 cases in a little over 2 years. We have resolved 3,032, so almost 100% of them. And so far, we have returned $5,454,559 to citizens of Wyoming that was being wrongfully. So with that, I am happy to open it up to questions and comments. And I'm going to call on Marty first because I already told her I loved her.
Thank you, Representative Hageman, and thank you for what you're doing with the post office. You resolved an issue we had in my community. I understand that Yvonne wants to get rid or privatize the postal service, but under Article 1, Section 8, the federal government is entitled to, must provide post roads and post offices. But home delivery, nothing in the Constitution about that. Privatize that. If I wanna hire my 13-year-old neighbor to ride his bike to the post office and bring it to me for $5 a week, I should be able to do that.
Well, that's an interesting idea, and I will admit, it is a huge challenge. We know that the post office has been running in the red for years and years and years. We want it to be more efficient. We've got challenges in some of our communities where they're dumping all of the Amazon boxes. We had that in Cheyenne. You go down to the post office and it's filled with Amazon boxes because they have a contract, is it called the last mile contract? Or something along those lines. And so in an effort to raise money, they entered into a contract with Amazon. And what we learned from the Amazon drivers is they're just gonna go to the post office, dump off the mail, dump them off and then leave town. Well, that's a terrible thing to do to our postal workers. It's a terrible thing to do to all of us who are reliant on receiving our mail, our medications through the mail. So this is definitely a challenge. I appreciate your advice in that regard. I hadn't necessarily thought about that. We'll take that back to our team. I have a gentleman by the name of Nicholas who's been an absolute star on this issue of getting information out to people and fighting to make sure that we can maintain postal service in Wyoming. We did get a change last week, and that is that they have agreed to keep the Casper office and the Cheyenne office open, and they've also said they're going to be investing several $1 million in both of those facilities. So that tells me that I think we may have won this battle, at least for this point in time, but I do know how important mail service is, so we'll continue to make sure we're protecting you.
I got a question.
Right over here, sir.
Okay, and I'm hoping you can help me. Stefanik is still being a congresswoman?
Elise Stefanik?
Yes, instead of being a cabinet member, because New York's governor won't release her, and we can't afford to lose a voting Republican because it's too close. And I came from Ohio, J.D. Vance. We have important people. You had Florida, and they put people in place so we don't lose. And according to what I read, or at least listened to Florida's governor, he said that as a governor, he had 90 days to replace that. They
tried to mess. The New York governor tried to mess around, but they didn't get it done. They were trying to do it so that they could delay that election until this fall.
October.
Yes, until this fall, and they were unable to accomplish that. So I believe that special election is in April. I think it's coming up pretty doggone quickly. That special election is.
Well, my question for you was, can we research that so that Democratic governors can't take your seat for a year?
It is according to their laws. So election law is primarily a state issue.
Okay.
And we do not want to federalize it. There's a lot of reasons we don't want to federalize it. It is up to the individual states as to how they fill that, but they have in New York, they have a certain deadline by which they have to fill the seats. They were trying to do, I don't know if they were going to try to say that she didn't resign at the right time. Whatever it was, they were trying to mess with the dates. I talked to Elise about 3 weeks ago on this specific issue. She says, no, the special election is going forward. They were unable to block their ability to do the special election, and I believe that special election is in April.
Okay. Thank you.
I'll go over here.
Yeah, good evening, Congressman. Appreciate all of your hard work, and glad Trump picked you a couple years ago.
Thank you.
Aside from that, I'm a combat vet, and I use this Afton VA clinic. It's been a horrible mess for the last 5 years. That's why I've had to go down to Palo Alto to do even dental implants, because nobody does it here. The outskirt people like us, and I'm speaking for at least 10 other vets that are in my situation, Rollins won't cover our medicine, so I have to come out of $300 out of my own pocket on a regular basis because as a disabled vet, my medicine is supposed to be paid for. Well, on the what is it? Something West is the insurance company, and they're terrible paying, and they don't do their job. And we don't have a doctor right now. We have to do everything by video, and I've actually contacted your office and the VA, the new administrator, hoping that they can speed up us out here that are suffering. it takes months for us to even get eye exams, and then we have to get special permission, and gotta wait for that letter to come in before we can drag it down to where we're going.
So I know that we have real challenges in Wyoming when it comes to VA services. I recognize that. I think Cheyenne operates quite well, but I know in some of our other cities and towns around the state, we've had some real challenges. We have been working through those. It is a bureaucracy that absolutely rivals anything you can imagine in terms of the paperwork and the paperwork. What I will tell you, and what the commitment I will make to you today, is Doug Collins is a friend of mine. And I have every intention, once the dust kind of settles a little bit, we have to let these people at least take office before I'm in there harassing them. I've been in harassing a couple of them. But I intend to go and talk to Doug Collins. We'll make sure that we have your information specifically. I'm also hoping that I can invite him out here so that he can see what it is like to provide services in the most rural setting in the United States.
He's an Iraqi vet, and I'm an Iraqi vet, and I got injured there. And he said when he was going to take ahead of the VA, he said he would like to concentrate on the rural areas, which are the big problem.
So that's what we will be pushing. And as I said, I'm working on that. And hopefully we will be able to take him to a couple of different places in Wyoming. That's a big ask, but I'm going to do whatever I can because I know that we're having some real challenges here. I'm going to come over here. I know you had some questions.
Yeah, well, I agree that all those things you read off on USAID sound ludicrous, but surely they do some good things. I was serving
So about 17% is good things. So what I'm saying is that all of these programs have been reviewed, and 17% of the programs that were previously being funded by USAID pursuant to their mission statement have been moved into the State Department.
Yeah.
So they have been moved in. So I'm not saying that everything that they did was bad, but what I will say is this. When I, as a congressman, when I have somebody, an agency, come to me and say, I'd like you to appropriate $500,000 to feed poor kids in Africa, and I may say, okay, well maybe that's a good use of money, and I'm going to appropriate $500 million to feed the poor kids in Africa. I don't want them to take $490,000 of that and spend it on these kinds of nonsense things and say, okay, but we spent $10,000 on those.
So we need to weed
And they're doing that.
rather than chainsaw.
And that's what they did. So 17% of those programs have been moved into the State Department. 17% of the USAID programs have been moved into
So who's going
the
to go after
State.
the State Department now? I mean, were they going to go after their budget?
We're looking at every agency that there is.
I just think we need to take a deep breath and try to start making sense.
See, I'm perfectly good with cutting this program. We're $36 trillion in debt. Every single dime that we spend on any one of these programs is borrowed money. Yes, right here. Yes.
Thank you so much for coming to visit us. We really appreciate it. I am the Wyoming Medical Society trustee for Lincoln County, and I'm also an OBGYN. And I'm concerned about our maternity deserts here in Wyoming, and specifically, I'm concerned that many of our hospitals operate at a deficit in Wyoming, with Medicaid barely keeping them afloat. And proposals to slash up to $800 billion over 10 years just really scares me in terms of how we're going to continue to be able to take care of our citizens, especially in the very rural parts of the state. And I found it really terrific that 63% of the adults in Wyoming on Medicaid are working and employed. It speaks a lot to the ethic here in this great state. And 28% of our population is low income. So I'm just curious if you support that cut, and my concern is healthcare and how we keep taking care of our patients.
What you do. One thing that is really important, and I'm very proud of the state of Wyoming for, we did not do Medicaid expansion. And the reason why that is so important is because where you're talking about the $800 billion in savings, on average for the patients that you're talking about, that is either a 50 or 70% reimbursement by the federal government. Medicaid expansion had the federal government reimbursing up to 90% of the Medicaid payments or the medical payments for able-bodied individuals. So our traditional Medicaid patients, the people with disabilities, people who were low-income families.
Pregnant women?
Well, no, just let me finish
Sorry,
this,
okay.
and then I'll come back to you. But in Wyoming, we receive either 50 or 70% reimbursement for our traditional Medicaid patients. The 90% would have been for able-bodied patients, or for able-bodied individuals. The state of Wyoming and 11 other states did not expand Medicaid. Wisconsin, I think West Virginia, I think Georgia, they did not expand Medicaid. So they don't have that difference. So a lot of the $800 billion that you're talking about in savings is the federal government reducing its obligations in those states that expanded Medicaid. That doesn't include Wyoming. So a lot of that $800 billion that you're talking about, let's say it's a state such as, let's say Nebraska is a 50% reimbursement state and they expanded Medicaid. The savings is in that 40% for able-bodied adults. It is not in the traditional patients. So for Wyoming, by not expanding Medicaid, we're not facing the kinds of deficits that other states are facing with doing what they're talking about with Medicaid. So Wyoming, by not expanding Medicaid, and the 11 other states are in a much better financial position than the other states are, number one. Number two, we are not looking at reducing the payments for Medicaid, Medicare, or Social Security. What we are looking at doing is getting rid of the massive waste, fraud, and abuse that has been going on in those programs.
Thank you so much for being here today, Representative. I'm a retired physician, Elizabeth, and I have been researching, which is very publicly available information. There's 88,000 Medicaid recipients in Wyoming. There are only 37 hospitals. Of the Medicaid dollars that are spent, 55% go towards long-term health care facilities. There is one in Lincoln County, Star Valley Health Center. The hospitals and the long-term care facilities depend on Medicaid. If Medicaid is cut to the tune of $880 billion, I dare say that there'll be hospital closures. I did hear a rumor, however, that our governor may come up with some money to prevent the closure of the hospitals. Did you hear that?
Well, I was going to say, you do realize, don't you, that Medicaid is administered by the states?
There is administration.
We do the matching funds, but Medicaid is primarily a state program.
There's like 54% in Wyoming that is federal dollars.
That's our dollars, but it's administered by the states.
Okay, but the administration of those cuts would cut the hospitals?
Not in Wyoming, because we didn't do the
37 hospitals.
but we didn't do the Medicaid expansion, is what I'm telling you.
Yeah, but that doesn't mean that they wouldn't be affected by Medicaid cuts as it exists, okay? There are 54% of Wyoming's Medicaid is still from the federal government.
I understand that. That part is being preserved.
So
that part is being preserved.
Of 37 hospitals, 16 hospitals are on the edge of closure. There are only 35 long-term health care facilities, nursing homes. And the nursing homes are where 5% of the recipients of Medicaid receive 55% of the Medicaid dollars in Wyoming. That means that any cuts will likely affect those long-term care facilities.
You're talking about a different program is what I'm trying to explain to you.
So that
there
wouldn't
are
be affected.
different categories of Medicaid recipients. Because Wyoming did not expand Medicaid for able-bodied adults, that's not talking about the seniors, that's not talking about the people in those homes. Because we did not expand to cover able-bodied adults, That is not going to be cut because we're not getting that money now. That money
But
is
the
not coming to
hospitals
Wyoming
And the
now.
long-term care facilities and the hospitals receive Medicaid dollars from
I
the
get they
state.
receive Medicaid dollars.
So-
We're not stopping the Medicaid program. The Medicaid program is going to continue. Wyoming is going to continue to get the 54% of Medicaid reimbursements. What we never did is we never expanded into this other
I know, and
category
did
that
affect
makes
the-
up the
that did
majority
affect the pregnant women
of
and
the
and
$800
single
billion.
women.
Not if they're not the able-bodied adults that I'm talking about. That's the majority of the $800 billion.
No,
Well, it is.
$80 billion
It is.
would affect the hospitals.
Right here.
It would affect our hospitals.
It's the wrong category.
So I think I've got something that we can all agree on. Can we get rid of changing our clocks? But can you please just make it so we don't have to do it anymore?
I don't necessarily understand that issue, but
I mean, it seems to me the easiest thing for Republicans, Democrats, Independents, everybody to get behind. Let's pick a time. Let's stick to it. Arizona does it. I mean, it's not. I mean, it's not something. Please do it.
right here.
And I agree with
Thank you. I knew we could do it.
I
do have a solution.
First of all, I want to thank you for coming. I also want to thank you for that weekly newsletter you put out. I may not always agree with what's in it, but I like knowing what's going on. And I like having a voice. Thank you very much for it.
I have a very good staff.
You do? Yes, I met one of them the other day at the library. I don't know if he's here. So anyway, so on to my question. I've been jumping back and forth because I don't know which issue to go with. So I'm going to go with the Social Security Administration. Now, I don't know if you've seen the interviews with Martin O'Malley. Martin O'Malley, for those who don't know, was the old commissioner of the Social Security Administration prior to Ms. King taking over, prior to the present one whose name I can't remember. So, Congress, by the Constitution, has been vested with the responsibility to form agencies and to dissolve them. That's not within the purview of the executive branch. As you explained, DOGE is not a creation, it's an evolution.
It is an office within the executive office of the president, and it is the reorganization of the U.S. Digital Service created by President Obama.
Yes. My concern is the way that they are going at the Social Security Administration. It's an open secret that they want to privatize it eventually. They being the
Who's they?
executive branch by our current President Trump.
Never heard him say it.
So they have 7,000 people that they are planning to that they want to remove. I lost my ability to speak English, so pardon me. They plan to slash 7,000 positions in the Social Security Administration. According to O'Malley, that is going to decapitate the organization because what they did was they walked in, they offered, okay, quit today, I'll pay you to the end of the year, get out. And they haven't made any effort to train or pass on the knowledge that those people had. So they're developing a knowledge and expertise deficit that's gonna decapitate Social Security. Martin O'Malley estimated between 30 and 90 days that we're going to start seeing disruptions in the payment system. Now, everybody, that's never going to happen. Well, did you know that the federal government just put out a list of federal buildings they wanted to sell? Yeah. they don't, get rid of Social Security.
So I'm going to say a couple of things about Social Security. First of all, I'm one of the few people that when anybody's talked out there about doing means testing on Social Security recipients, especially people who are vested and paid into it, my reaction is that's a violation of the Fifth Amendment because it's an unconstitutional takings. So I'm one of the few people who has said you can't do means testing after the fact and say you've paid into this all your lives and now you've got a certain amount of money and we're going to take it away from you. I believe that that is unconstitutional. I will also say, getting to the building issue, they have done a study, only 11% of the federal buildings in Washington, D.C., there is an 11% occupancy rate in our federal buildings in Washington, D.C. People did not come back to work after COVID. I cannot, for the life of me, understand why. You want to know one of the biggest services I've provided since I came into office? Getting people passports, because people in the passport office didn't come back to work. You can't process passports remotely. So it's one of the biggest services that our office has provided is getting emergency passports for people. People who may have applied 8 months ago and couldn't get a passport in 8 months. As far as Social Security, I think that there is more fear-mongering going on about what's going to happen. Why do they do it? They do it because they know that they can scare everybody into believing that we're taking away what you need to live and what you've paid into. None of us in Congress are talking about taking away Social Security. We are talking about doing things that are going to make it stronger. We are talking about doing things so that it doesn't completely collapse in 10 years. We are talking about making it so that people who are not entitled are not receiving it. But none of us are talking about taking away Social Security that is legitimately earned, that people have paid into. I don't know how many times I have to say that. I don't know how many times President Trump has to say it.
He hasn't said it.
He has I've got 3 more questions right back here. Yes.
Hi, I'm Rebecca Talbot, and I live in the Star Valley area, in the Alpine area, and I happen to be a Firewise ambassador. And we're trying to build that up more and more throughout the valley. But I wanted to thank you for co-sponsoring Fix Our Forest, HR 471. And I just wanted to mention that this is really, really something that should be in everybody's radar right now with all the fires that we've seen the past couple of years. Our forest, there's a lot of old growth going on, and there's dead stands, and there's things that are ladder fuels. Also, we have here in Wyoming in particular, we have people that are living urban interfacing wildlands. And a lot of us live right up against mountains or grasslands. And I'm just here to say that we need more funding, and we need more people hired on to help clear across, well, this is a long valley. We're talking 80 miles here. And this is only one little significant part of Wyoming that has need of that.
Well, I'm very hopeful that we are going to be able to do a better job of managing our forests and getting back to what they were intended when they were created under the 1897 Organic Act. I am very excited about the Fix Our Forest Act because I have talked to numerous forest superintendents around this state. They have so many good ideas of how to manage this resource and manage it well. I was out for 8 hours about on the Bighorn fire this past summer and visiting with that superintendent up there. I mean, I was just in awe of the knowledge that he had, the expertise that he had. And I'm hoping that we can get more of stockpiling the power in DC and empowering these superintendents, whether it is in the Bridger Teton, the Shoshone, the Bighorn, the Belle Fourche. I would love to see them being empowered to make better decisions for their national forests, on a more flexible basis. And I'm hoping we can move to that.
Quick little comment.
I'm gonna go right over here, and then I'll go one question over here.
Just one little thing. Got to think about insurance too, because people are losing insurance that live.
That's a
right-
challenge, and what happened in California is gonna make it
Yeah,
hard for all of us.
So I would like you to consider that here in Wyoming and how we might resolve that, how people could firewise their properties, and hence when they go to their insurance company, they could say, well, we've done these things, so we should be able to keep our
It's
insurance
gonna
on
be,
our property.
insurance is going to continue to be a challenge, and one of the things that did happen out in California is when they tried to price fix the insurance industry, the insurance companies left the state. And so that is why so many of those homes, they didn't have insurance. That is going to be a challenge for us to figure out. I know that they're going to come to Congress for a request, a supplemental budget of potentially hundreds of billions of dollars to try to address that one, or those catastrophes that happen in November. And so I know that these are challenges everywhere we are. We're trying to do our best in terms of better resource management. And I am hoping that we will be able to do that. We've got some excellent people, some excellent federal employees right here in Wyoming. I've had a great time visiting with our BLM folks, our Forest Service people who live and work here, and I know that they have the best interests of Wyoming at heart. They have the best interest of these resources at heart. They always have. And the challenge is that their hands have been tied by the decisions that are made out of Washington, D.C. And I'm hoping that ultimately what happens with these things that we're going through right now, that there will be a concerted effort to take these agencies and provide more power, or put more power into the communities where they actually have an impact. USDA in Kansas. I mean, that is the center of the ag industry in the entire United States of America. It would be great to have the majority of our USDA employees in the central, in Nebraska, in Kansas, in Oklahoma, in Texas. The same with the Forest Service folks. Get the Forest Service folks out in Denver, in Wyoming. Give them the authority that they need to actually manage those resources, and I think every one of us will benefit from that. They're excellent experts. The people that I have met who work here, I have the utmost respect for them.
How many of them need fire?
Yes, sir.
And they have red cards, fighting fires.
Yes, sir.
I'm concerned about the NRCC fundraising activities on small donors. You're damaging the brand, you're burning your small donors. Over half of the texts I get every day are from them. They're insipid, they're condescending, and sometimes abusive. And it's going to hurt the effort in the next go-round if you don't fix that.
Okay.
I worked 40 years in California on the Republican side as a pollster and consultant. I'd be happy to serve on a committee to fix that, but you're going to run into trouble. What you have are fundraising consultants who care only about their commissions, and I'm inundated, and the fixes, the stop, end, or changing the listing of the phone number don't work because they simply move to another number.
Okay.
And that needs to be fixed.
All right, I appreciate that, and I will definitely pass it on. I appreciate your comments, I really do.
Thank you.
I really do.
I just wanted to add some
One
things.
right here.
Oh, me?
Yes.
Oh, on the time question, I have one other option, Greenwich Mean Time. I'm not for or against it, but it is an option. On the Social Security privatization, I believe that was a discussion under Bush Jr. and towards the end of his first term. And then on forest management, Trump in his first term sent money out to California, and they only used 10% of it for its stated intent. I think those are, things that should have been said too.
I'm going to take just one last question back here, and then I know that we have to take off because I have to get to Kimmerer tonight.
I'm a world traveling data architect for one of the large firms in the country.
Talk louder.
I'm a world traveling data architect for one of the large firms in the country. Used to work for some of the other ones. With the changes in the green card space and other things that are going on right now, I have a huge interest in getting cowboy boots instead of Chinese. Is there any kind of programs that we can have or we can activate so that some of these hard-working Western kids can end up traveling on airplanes with us and representing us across the world versus Indians and Chinese?
I'll have to visit with you more about what specifically you're talking about, so that we can, I've got Carly right back there, she'll talk to you, and we'll get your information. I know we've flown back and forth before, and we'll get that information, and I'll try to figure out exactly what you're requesting.
Representative. My concern is an unelected billionaire who is having over the self-applicant billionaire.
So I'll answer your question. The question was oversight over the South African billionaire, and I can answer that very, very quickly. The President of the United States does, as does Congress. Congress will ultimately be the ones making the decisions about these various programs.